We get a lot of questions about our radiant floor system. One of the most common though being how much did it all cost? So I thought it was a good time to address this in video format. I'm going to go through every part of the system line by line, from the boiler to the board to the zip ties we use to hold the tubing down to the rebar grid. At the end, we'll add up the total system costs, and I also have some operating cost data to share with you. We're coming through our first winter now of actually using the system all the way through, so I have several months worth of propane data to share as well. Before diving into all the cost details, I wanted to mention that we've created a spreadsheet version of this on our website. It's got all the details we're going to share in this video, but a lot more information, like all of the exact product details and specifications, how we use them, all the quantities, what vendor we purchased them from, when everything was bought, high-res photos of the install, and we've even color-coded all of the different line items to indicate which part of the system they go into. The link to this is below, and if you're planning a radiant system for the price of a premium Starbucks coffee, you can save yourself all of the headache and research that I had to go through when planning our system out. I can tell you for sure, I wish I would have had a resource like this when I started planning our system out. But without further ado, let's get started on all of the line items. I'm going to be listing these out in kind of chronological order of install, so starting with the tubing and moving on to all the final mechanicals. Also note that I've included 6% sales tax. We're in Pennsylvania and that's what our tax rate is, so all of these prices include that 6%. Starting off with all the tubing, the vanes of the system, that was PEX-A tubing and came out to a total of $471.90. The zip ties that we used to tie the tubing to the rebar grid came out to $20 even. When it came time to route all the tubing up in the corner of the slab, I needed to build a temporary structure to hold all that. I used a piece of 2-foot long unistrut, which was $8.46. Attached to that unistrut were all the conduit elbows that were used to turn the tubing from in the slab up vertically to go into the manifold that's mounted on the wall. Those were $27.48 for those conduit elbows. The clamps to hold the elbows to the piece of unistrut were $21.56. I bought a pack of PEX foam staples. They're typically used in a stapling gun to staple PEX down to foam board. I just wanted to press these in by hand in a couple locations to keep the tubing down to the level of slab where we were going to put concrete control cuts in order to protect it. It turned out we never made the control cuts anyway, so that was kind of a waste, but that pack of staples was $39.94. I had to get a bunch of brass barbed T-fittings to link all of the PEX tubing runs together so I could pressurize them for the slab pour. Those brass T-fittings were $14.19. For the same connections there on the temporary manifold, I had to get a bunch of cinch rings. Those were $22.96. That rounds out all the rough-in materials for the in-slab portion, all the stuff that I had to do before the pour. I did use a little T with a Schrader valve and a pressure gauge on it, but I had already had that from previous plumbing projects, so I'm not going to include that in the cost. But all in all, it was a pretty short materials list for the tubing layout. There wasn't a whole lot to be bought there. Now let's move on to the indoor portion of the system. Fast forward through framing all the house and getting the utility room started. This is where things start to get a little bit more expensive. First is the stainless steel radiant manifold that is used to connect all the tubing to all the supplies and returns, joining them into a common manifold for connection to the board. That manifold I got online. It was $260.95. Next is the real core of the system, the control board and the pump. That was a pre-assembled and pre-plumbed unit that I also purchased online. I have more details about that in the actual radiant floor install video. That setup was $1,254. The same supplier sent not only the control board, but also the tankless water heater or boiler that we're using for the radiant floor and our domestic supply actually, because it is an open system. That water heater was $1,298. Unfortunately, these items were not procured on Amazon, so there was no free Prime shipping or anything. We had to pay for shipping for these components. It was actually still able to be delivered via UPS, so it wasn't freight shipping, which would have been much more expensive. The total shipping cost for these two large boxes was $156.91. That covers all of the main components of the system. Now let's get into some more of the nitty-gritty details on the plumbing aspects, both the water plumbing and all the condensate and vent pipe plumbing. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention with the water heater is it was supplied with the concentric vent, both the intake and exhaust vent that make a single penetration through the wall. So that was wrapped up in the $1,298 cost for the water heater. All right, plumbing. The first thing I wanted to get was a scale inhibitor, just because this is a tankless unit. They're known to accumulate hard water or calcium deposits on the coils. So as a precautionary measure, I thought it would be a good idea to install an inline scale inhibitor. I'm not sure how much it's actually going to work. It's important to still do the maintenance and the flushing periodically, or annually, I guess it is. But that scale inhibitor, manifold, and the cartridge was $74.13. I had to do some copper plumbing and soldering to connect the board to the manifold, which was a first for me. That was an interesting experience. I only singed a little bit of the hair off my hand, got a little bit frisky with the torch. But for that, I had to get soldering flux, which was $5.28, and a small roll of actual solder for $11.64. I had to get several copper elbows in order to make that board to manifold connection. I'm not going to list them all out here, but in total they were $13.95. They are individually listed out in the spreadsheet. To make the transition from CPVC to copper tubing going into the board, I thought the easiest way to do that would be some SharkBite fittings. Those were $16.57. To make the manifold separable from the control board in the case that I ever had to replace it in the future, I thought it would be a good idea that instead of hard piping it together or soldering it together, I would use unions. So I had to get some 3/4 inch copper unions. In total, those were $43.10. A couple copper couplings in the same area were $2.06, and 2 brass reducer bushings were $10.60. For the exhaust vent, I needed to get some Fernco flexible couplings. Those were $13.78. I also needed several 3-inch PVC elbows. Altogether, those were $27.10. I have them all individually listed out on the spreadsheet. To connect the boiler to the vent piping, I needed to get 1 stick of 3-inch solid core PVC pipe. That was $39.87. Let's move on to all the condensate plumbing. The condensate that comes from these tankless boilers is acidic, so in order to put it into your septic system, you have to neutralize it first with a neutralizer cartridge. That cartridge was $45.56. I had to get some 3/4 inch Schedule 40 PVC pipe for the condensate drain connection. That was $12.94. A whole array of 3/4 inch PVC fittings, elbows, Ys, bends, plugs, caps, you name it. Altogether, that was $16.63. Those are all listed out on the spreadsheet. A few 3/4 inch pipe straps held everything firmly to the wall. Those were $2.34. And finally, a couple cans of PVC cement and primer to hold all that together was $13.63. And that brings us to a grand total of, drum roll please, $3,945.53. So just under $4,000 for all the material costs. I think that's actually pretty reasonable. Now, of course, this does not include labor. We did literally all of the labor for the radiant floor system, from all the tubing to all of the mechanicals. I honestly did not get any quotes on labor, so I have no clue what it would cost. In our market, we're in Pennsylvania, I would guess that it's somewhere between $4,000 to $6,000 in labor for a plumber or a specialty radiant floor person to come out to do all of this installation. I really don't know though. It could range widely. It could be way more than that in some markets. I really just don't know. But for the material cost, you have a good figure at just under $4,000. This is also a 36 by 40 slab. It's a well-insulated envelope. Keep that in mind as well for some context. If you had a much larger building, you'd obviously need much more tubing, more zip ties, a bigger boiler, a bigger control board if you wanted more zones. That's something else to mention too. This is all single zone. The boards that allow you to do multi-zone control, of course, cost more. That brings us to operating costs. This is our propane tank. This is what stores all the energy that powers the system. And of course, propane is not free. At this time in our market, it is $2.85 a gallon delivered, and the truck comes monthly to top the tank off. We're just coming into spring now of our first real winter using the system from start to end. And another piece of context is we did not actually get our ceiling insulation upstairs until like mid-February of this winter. So for most of the winter, it was really just heating the bottom floor, and a substantial portion of that heat was just blowing up through the ceiling and out the ridge vent in the upstairs. So the upstairs was still quite cold, but the radiant floor was able to keep the downstairs fairly temperate, and the upstairs at least kept it above freezing so that none of the water in the pipes froze. But just keep that in mind for these propane prices, that now with a fully insulated and air sealed envelope, next winter, our propane prices will be significantly lower. And of course, this does also include some domestic water heating too, but I'm not gonna even bother with that. It was pretty minimal for all intents and purposes. We just had one sink hooked up. I'll start with the bill we got in mid-October. That was for the whole past previous month. That was $12.90 worth of propane. So obviously not a lot. It was not very cold by then. In November, starting to get a little bit colder, that bill doubled to $25.80. By December, the system was running most of the time. We kept the ambient temperature on the lower floor somewhere like 49, 50 degrees-ish most of the time. That kept everything at least above freezing. That December bill was $115.33. In January, it's pretty much the same story, $114.70. The coldest month from January to February saw the highest propane bill at $134.43. And I just paid the March bill. Obviously, we're coming into spring now, so the system is running less. And actually, we did get the insulation finished in mid-February, so that plays a part too. That was $93.45 for the March bill. In total for the whole winter then, we spent $496.61 to keep the house above freezing for the most part. And actually now that we've got insulation in, it is essentially perfectly climate controlled in there. It's very comfortable, and that money was so well worth it to be able to keep things in the house from freezing and keep it semi-comfortable in there when we were working on all of the mechanical rough-ins. It's also a really even, comfortable heat. Like, there's no forced air blowing around or anything, so it doesn't stir up any dust to keep the space warm, and it's just very even and comfortable. And I should also note, we did not have the insulation on the front garage edges, the garage door aprons that are exposed to the cold weather. A slab loses about 80% of its heat through the edges, and we have over 30 feet of exposed slab perimeter because of those garage door aprons. So before we put our driveway in, I'm going to be putting a layer of 2-inch XPS foam on the edge of those, and that should help even more. I'll be pretty curious to see next winter what our bill looks like with all the insulation fully in and the house fully air sealed. We also have our mini splits up and running now. We really didn't run them much during the winter, just when we need a little bit of extra boost, but in future winters, we'll probably split the load between the radiant and the mini splits just to experiment and see what the most efficient way we could possibly heat the space is. It probably will be the mini splits, but the primary reason we got those was for cooling, so we'll see how they do in heating as well. Plus, the upstairs will be conditioned by a separate heat pump system. There's gonna be a door closing off the downstairs and upstairs, so the radiant system will have a much easier job not having to constantly blow heat into the upper floor. It was crazy. When you were standing in the stairwell, you could literally feel the draft of heat coming from the lower floor to the upper floor, and that was basically doing that like all winter. So definitely not the most efficient situation, but it got the job done for the winter and kept us comfortable during construction. I didn't mention anything about electricity costs. I didn't have a great way to isolate how much power the radiant system was actually using. We did pay extra when getting that control board to get a Grundfos Alpha 2 pump. That's an electrically commutated pump, and it draws significantly less power than its counterpart without an electrically commutated motor. So once we are settled in, I'm going to probably install some sort of monitoring system on all the circuits in the house that I can break down exactly our electricity usage, and I will report back in a future update video on propane and electricity costs for this system once it's totally steady state and running through a winter. I know this is a very engineering thing to do, but I think it would be kind of cool to know. Like I mentioned previously, if you want to know all of the product details, the quantities, the vendors we got all of these system components from, and how we use them in our system, the spreadsheet is on our website. You can find a link below. Hopefully this helps you in planning your radiant system out. This was a great learning experience and project for us, and we're looking forward to the next time we have to do this, probably in the future edition. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.